Hello and welcome back to And the Gooby Goes Too. I am back with my final personal ballot video for the 98th Annual Academy Awards, which are taking place in just 6 days on Sunday, March 15th. It is here, folks. It is high time. The week is here. It's time for all of us to get our content out there, our final personal videos out, and of course, all of our final predictions posted and known to the world. So I am not going to be able to cover every single category like I wanted to. I'm going to end up skipping all of the below the line craft categories. I just simply don't have time. And like I mentioned in my last video, I am not going to be able to do like makeup and visual effects because I haven't seen everything. And like, I technically shouldn't even do costume because I haven't seen Fire and Ash yet, even though I don't know why Fire and Ash got that nomination, to be quite frank. But in this video, I am going to go through all of the features. So animated feature, documentary feature, international feature, and then wrap it up with director and best picture. And for best picture, I will do it just like the Oscar voters do. I will go through from number 10 to number 1 and give my preferential ballot ranking for those films. So let's go ahead and get started, and we will kick it off with animated feature. So for animated feature, as a reminder, our nominees for best animated feature are Arco, Elio, K-pop Demon Hunters, Little Amelie or the character of Rain, and Zootopia 2. So this one's pretty easy for me, lining up with who is going to win this category. My favorite of this bunch is absolutely K-pop Demon Hunters. I have to give a shout out to my husband. I don't know if you can hear me or not, but he was pushing this movie last summer when it first dropped on Netflix. He was telling me about it. He was telling our friends about it. And to our unfair dismay, we all kind of shrugged it off like, yeah, okay, this sounds cute. Like maybe we'll check it out. But he definitely had his finger on the pulse of something really special. I remember him specifically coming to me and saying, you need to watch this. I think it's an Oscar movie. Do you think it can be an Oscar movie? And I was like, I don't know. Let's check it out. And I finally watched it and I was like, wow, this is incredible. And of course, heard the music all summer, all fall, golden on the top of the charts for the entire second half of 2025. And it became undeniable. And it definitely stuck with me the most. The story behind how it was created, how much time it took, the music aspect of it. I really just admired everything about it. But I will say, I did enjoy several films in this 5. Most recently, I just watched Arco the other night. I really enjoyed that one. Visually, I thought it was so stunning and beautiful. The Technicolor really just was something really special that had me like so focused and captivated the entire time. And I quite enjoyed the story as well. The ending frustrated me maybe a little bit, but I do give it credit that it was like 80 minutes. And I will always forgive a sloppy ending if it means that we're wrapping a movie up for under an hour and a half for a film that should not be over 90 minutes. I watched Little Amelie on a flight a couple weeks ago when I was coming home from Florida. I did really enjoy that one. I have had those types of relationships with like caretakers, babysitters, mentors, you name it, those people that you feel just so attached to because maybe your family doesn't quite understand you as much. And so I really did feel heart tugged by that story overall. Zootopia 2, I went and saw in theaters with a bunch of 5-year-olds around me. There was a child next to me when I went to go see it at Alamo Drafthouse in DC who was inconsolably sobbing when the big twist happens in Zootopia 2. By the way, the twist fully got me. Like, I felt like such a bumbling idiot, but like, I was like, oh, what? Yeah, it got me good. And I was like, you know what? Props to you for, making this naive 29-year-old gasp a little bit during this children's movie, but that was a lot of fun. Leo wasn't the biggest fan of. I thought it was a little bit of a letdown from Pixar. I thought there was a lot more they could have done, but so be it. It doesn't matter anyway, because yeah, absolutely my vote for best animated feature would easily be going to K-pop Demon Hunters. Next up, best documentary feature. So as a reminder, the nominees are The Alabama Solution, Come See Me in the Good Light, Cutting Through Rocks, Mr. Nobody Against Putin, and The Perfect Neighbor. So I will say I did not see Cutting Through Rocks. I can't find it. Even through underground sources, I have just not been able to find this damn film. So I will consider myself valid to give my thoughts in this category because I made every effort possible to see that documentary and I just couldn't find it. So for this one, the front runner favorite all year has been The Perfect Neighbor. And I gotta say, I was not too hot on it. Maybe I went in with super high expectations because of, it was sweeping. Well, I wouldn't say sweeping because honestly, there were a good number of documentaries that were kind of sharing the critics awards all season. But it was definitely a critics favorite. Um, I think a lot of folks were pretty not perplexed, but like pleasantly surprised that it ended up getting that surprise best editing nomination at Critics Choice. Um, yeah, I mean, so it nearly swept. It got what 13 wins, and a lot of the only other ones like got three, which were like My Undesirable Friends, which isn't even nominated here. Orwell 2+2=5, which isn't nominated, so it pretty much swept. I just didn't. It is a pretty impressive feat of editing, the use of all the body cam footage. However, let's backtrack a little bit. Remember, I talked about this in my shorts ballot video that when it comes to documentary shorts and documentaries, I want to learn something. I want to see some sort of like call to action or like some sort of coverage of a greater issue that a global atmosphere should see in order to help make the world a better place in some way. I know those are lofty hopes, but like that's kind of what I'm looking for in a good documentary, especially on a global platform like the Academy Awards. And so when it comes to The Perfect Neighbor, to be very blunt, I found it to be intrusive and borderline trauma porn. Um, it takes a lot to like disturb me. I was really disturbed that they showed the footage of the son finding out that his mother was shot and killed. I don't know how much involvement that family had with like what was chosen to be included and whatnot, but I just cannot personally fathom like allowing that piece of my life or my relative's life being exposed to the world like that. It's probably by far and large for most of the people that were there that night, like probably going to be one of the worst evenings of their entire life. So I wasn't a fan of that, and it also just felt like, and unfortunately I feel like this is where a lot of people are gravitating towards it, is that like there is a bit of an obsession with like trauma porn type content, and so just because it's so like traumatic, people think it's good. However, I don't know what they don't really give a message for what this film was supposed to mean until like the credits. At the very end, they have a small clip art reel that like shows the statistics about the stand your ground laws and everything and like with Florida, and then you're kind of like, okay, so is this about changing stand your ground laws? Like, I just found it to be a bit of a sloppy message. I don't support what she did whatsoever. However, I feel like there was no exploration as to how she ended up in the position she did, and solely was just focused on the interactions in which the police were involved, obviously because the whole documentary is relies on body cam footage. But to me, I'm like, why is she alone? I think her being alone in her life like is a significant factor. Like, how did she get to this place to be? Like, what is her mental state? Is she sane? Is she ill? I felt like there were a lot of questions left unanswered, and then it just puts this general message out there that's like, stand your ground law is bad. Which, like, yeah, it is, but I don't know. It did not land for me that much. Like I said, an impressive feat of editing, but that was about it for me personally. So that's my thoughts on The Perfect Neighbor. And then so Come See Me in the Good Light. I was kind of surprised that this got nominated. It's pretty rare for this type of like documentary story to be recognized by the Academy Awards, so it's cool in that regard. But you know, autobiographical piece is hard to come by unless it like really touches on a significant global issue. So this very personal, intimate story is definitely a rarity to be recognized by the Academy. So that's cool in that regard. However, I don't know what it did for me like as a documentary other than like touch my heart. Very touching story, very sweet story, getting to see the life that Andrea Gibson lived and, all the struggles that Andrea went through with regards to their cancer treatment and everything. And all the while, the idea of their poetry sort of surrounding their struggle throughout the end of their life. But again, like I said, with regards to like what I look for in an impactful documentary, did this impact me emotionally? Sure, but I didn't really know what to leave it with. Like, I had a sense of compassion and like gratitude, but I don't know what like bigger issue it was touching on. So I'm happy it's here. This would not get my vote. But yeah, so those are my thoughts, and come see me in the good light. So the Alabama solution, I really I'd say enjoyed hesitantly, but I found this to be a very stunning documentary piece. It explores all the fucked up things that are going on with Alabama state penitentiary system, told primarily through the use of contraband cell phone recorded footage that the convicts inside are recording, with phones that they are not allowed to have. And the things that this revealed, as somebody who like obviously like understands that the US justice system is fucked up in itself and the prison system is even worse, seeing just like how bad it really is in a place where is kind of socially behind by a few decades was really devastating, infuriating. Finding out who Kay Ivey is, all the crazy shit that she does. She is like a living villain. Her look, her voice, like it is just horrifying. And so I found this to be like just a wrenching and stunning piece of documentary overall. I definitely left it understanding that like there are places within the US specifically that like need to get their shit together with how they're handling prisons, let alone how we're doing it as an entire country federally. But yeah, so I left this one like thinking it was a solid second place for me. But definitely my personal vote for this category would go to Mr. Nobody Against Putin. So this follows the story of Pavel Talenkin, who was working at a school in Karabash, which is like right near the Ural Mountains in Russia. And it was his story, his position at this school. He's a videographer for like events and everything that take place at this school. And so he's recording this, this is taking place in like 2022, 2023. And so he's recording as, the Russia-Ukrainian war is going on and like kicking off. And Putin is like delivering instructions to school saying, you need to be feeding this propaganda to these students, to these children, and we need to make sure that our nation is aligned, essentially. So, with his position he has the ability to literally capture the moments in which the entire culture of the school changes. He reaches out to a couple folks in Europe to try and figure out how he can get this message out. He ends up connecting with somebody, and at the end of it follows him fleeing Russia to get this footage out of the country and into the hands of folks who eventually put this documentary together. So this really just touched on every point for me. It brought such an internal lens to what was going on and what it still is going on, in the Russia-Ukraine crisis, and put it in a unique perspective of it, like being based at essentially an elementary school. A lot of the kids that they show are primary school age. And so seeing it, rather than seeing, combat footage from like the front line, seeing what the messaging is doing to, the next generations was like a whole different type of impact to me that I found to be really effective. And even more so, you see he often celebrates the birthdays of all of his graduated high school students with them, which just shows how much Pavel was such an integral and adored piece of that school community. And celebrating with those students who are now of age to be drafted, and they get pulled into the war. Some of them die. It's really devastating to see and understand, okay, these are people that like he watched grow up and he helped foster their education, and now they're getting sent into this fight and losing their life because of it. So just so many different things that I look for in a great documentary that this did. Such high stakes. Pavel talks about how he's queer within this. So like that's a whole different level of stakes by, being a queer person in Putin's Russia. So just so many factors and categories that were just like, yes, check boxes for me. So for best documentary feature, my personal vote would absolutely be for Mr. Nobody Against Putin. Okay, now on to best international feature. So the nominees we have are The Secret Agent from Brazil, It Was Just an Accident from France, Sentimental Value from Norway, Surat from Spain, and The Voice of Hin Rajab from Tunisia. So a couple things with regards to this category. So, for best international feature film, every country gets to submit one film to represent their country to be considered for a nomination for best international feature. Um, and so sometimes, you're it's based on the country that is producing it, representing it, deciding to like select it as its submission. So sometimes you have films that aren't necessarily like taking place in that country. I'll use it as an example. Amelia Perez last year, made by a French filmmaker, and so like even though it's a story that takes place primarily in Mexico, it was France's submission for best international feature last year. Um, Similarly, with it was just an accident. Jafar Panahi being an Iranian filmmaker and that being filmed in Iran, but for reasons we'll talk about, it was produced in France and it was therefore France's representation. Um, so, with Best International Feature, the way I look at this category is there's a reason why we have a Best International Feature category in itself, separated from Best Picture, and independent of like any other type of nominations that the film could receive on its own. And for me, what I look for in Best International Feature, if it's there within the nominees, is something that like the other thing being too, it's the fact that the country gets the award. It's the country submitting that gets recognized. It's the country getting the award. So it's like for me, I tend to be drawn towards films in this category that represent something bigger and like very important, either for the country submitting it or the filmmaker itself. Um, and so this category is often difficult for me because what I think is the most deserving winner for this Oscar might not be my favorite movie within the category. And that is the case this year. Going through all these quick, Sentimental Value, I've talked about it a lot, is my favorite film within this category, for sure. Without a doubt, like, is my number one against this group of five. However, it Was Just an Accident is the film I would pick because of the fact of Jafar Panahi's story and the level of persecution he has faced as a filmmaker for exposing, a lot of political issues in Iran. The fact of having to, essentially shoot the film in private, get this footage smuggled out so that it could be produced somewhere else and then brought to the screen. That level of risk and stakes for a filmmaker. Jafar Panahi's still facing pending persecution once he goes back to Iran for making It Was Just an Accident. And so to me, I'm like that's what we should be representing for international feature, because that's not something that Hollywood filmmakers have to face. They aren't facing persecution for creating their art. They aren't putting their literal life at stake in order to get a film on screen. And so that's why I think in this category we should represent and recognize that, unless it's a really bad movie. Like, I'm not going to say that anything that anyone produces in those scenarios should be recognized, but I also found It Was Just an Accident to be a very interesting and intriguing and invigorating piece of cinema. So for me, I would be voting for It Was Just an Accident, even though Sentimental Value is my favorite film in this category. Sarat, like I talked about in my last video, like blew my fucking socks off, and I thought was just such like a pinnacle film experience for me. Like, I think that's a movie going experience that will live in my mind forever. The Secret Agent was incredible. I wasn't the biggest fan of The Voice of Hind Rajab, to be honest. I just watched it on Saturday. But also, such an interesting piece of filmmaking. With The Voice of Hind Rajab, they literally took a real chain of phone calls from a girl that was trapped in a car in Gaza and was at risk of being killed, and took that footage of her making those phone calls and then created a script and a storyline and like filmed other actors playing people at the call center. So very fascinating concept. I don't know if it worked in execution so well throughout the entire thing, but like I found the last 20 minutes to just be so devastating and well done, that I did enjoy the film overall. But yeah, I want to have conversations about this category with people who have like seen everything, and like I would love to talk to Academy voters about how they vote here, because I'm sure a lot of people just vote for their favorite movie, and maybe that's like the right thing to do and how this category should be. But like I said, for me, I think we should be recognizing risk and high stakes, and for me, that is absolutely It Was Just an Accident. All right, on to Best Director. So the nominees are Chloe Zhao for Hamnet, Josh Safdie for Marty Supreme, Paul Thomas Anderson for One Battle After Another, Joachim Trier for Sentimental Value, and Ryan Coogler for Sinners. This is a tricky one this year, because I think I I love each of these directors and what they did this year for their films. I think they are all properly nominated, and I think this five is great. As I just talked about in international with Jafar Panahi, would have loved to see him represented here. However, I can deeply respect, the reasons why all five of these nominees are here. With that being said, when it comes to directing, this is one that maybe I overthink a little bit as well in terms of who I'd be voting for, because I'm thinking about how they were like the big aura bubble around their film and like how they brought that thing to life. And I think sometimes that gets confused and mixed up with a screenplay, with editing, with acting performances. Especially because nowadays a lot of directors are also their own screenwriters for their films. And so sometimes it's for me at least, it's sometimes hard to see and say, okay, what directing specifically like drove this film home the most, and like what director here is most worthy of being recognized with an Academy Award in that title specifically, because all five of these folks are also represented in their respective screenplay categories too. And I think most, if not all of them, are also represented in as producers on their respective films too. So you got to look at and say, what is the distinction about best director from the other award categories? I think about it a lot. I still don't even know if I've fully decided yet what it is. However, I think I'm going to talk out loud a little bit here, because I was thinking about this today and I didn't come to a decision. And I think I'm down to two personally for like the directing that made the movie. And for me, that is Joachim Trier for Sentimental Value and Chloe Zhao for Hamnet. I kind of talked about this in screenplay a little bit. I tend to be very favorable towards emotional stories, films heavy with dialogue, films heavy with like setting a setting. And of course, those two are definitely those two films of this category for sure. With Hamnet, when I left that film, I was thinking to myself, man, you can just tell that a woman directed that movie. And it made it so incredibly like impactful and compassionate and empathetic and touching and powerful. Like I feel like I can tell when a film like has a woman director's heart in it. And this is absolutely, a pinnacle of that statement. So I'm partially in favor of Chloe Zhao here. However, with Joachim Trier, this is the movie that I can't stop thinking about, that I can't stop dissecting, that I can't stop telling people about, wanting to show my friends about. And I do think at the end of the day, that comes down to his direction. I think it's a very strong screenplay. I think it has very strong performances, but I do think Joachim Trier has a very special touch with how he directs these intimate stories. And he brings like a sense of like energy to them when it's needed. I think about the opening with Nora, having the back and forth of deciding whether or not she's going to go on stage to, do that performance and everything that goes along with that, and the cinematography of how it's shot, the cut of how it kind of like, you find out it's like this really crazy, like high octane underscored piece of stage art. Like it's so interesting. And then I'm talking to myself here again and I'm thinking like, well, is that the editing? Is that in the screenplay? So it's really tough. I have a really hard time deciphering that sometimes. And I know for me, it would make me definitely, I don't know, probably not a pencil. I'm sure the ballots are online now. It definitely had me like scrolling my cursor up and down all these nominees thinking, who is the best director of this year? I think this is absolutely the hardest category for me this year. I think I have to give this one to Chloe Zhao for Hamnet. Regardless of what you think of that movie, of that story, that entire film felt like such like a cozy environment with such like an eerie air to it as well. it's like you feel kind of comfortable there, but like that something bad is looming. And I think that her ability to set up that environment is what made that movie so impactful. So I'm going to commit here and say if I had an Oscar ballot in my screen, I would be clicking Chloe Zhao's name for Hamnet for Best Director. And finally, let's talk Best Picture. So our nominees, we've got Begonia, F1, Frankenstein, Hamnet, Marty Supreme, One Battle After Another, The Secret Agent, Sentimental Value, Sinners, and Train Dreams. So I'm just going to go through 10 to 1. Try not to touch on these too much because I don't want to take up too much time. So at number 10, I have F1. I don't know if this needed to be here this year. I'm fine that it is, I guess. I enjoyed watching it overall. I know I talked a little bit about that with some predictions videos where I was surprised about the amount that I enjoyed it. But I don't know if it represents anything great in terms of being a Best Picture nominee. I thought the score was fun, sounds great, performances were whatever, the story was whatever. But yeah, so pretty simply, F1, number 10. Number 9, I have Frankenstein. This is a pretty recent watch for me, and I believe I touched on it a little, but I wasn't huge on this adaptation. I thought the way I've been describing it to my friends that I've been talking about who have seen it and everything is it feels like so much happened, but so little happened at the same time. I'm not a big fan of narrated films. I thought the way they set it up with like the two sides of the story was like just kind of cliche. And again, it feels so weird. Like it feels like the first bit, I liked the setup to like the creation of the creature. But everything from his inception onward was just kind of like, I don't know. It felt like it was kind of rushed, but sluggish at the same time. And I was not a fan of the ending either. Just felt a little corny. So I thought it was visually stunning. Of course, anything Guillermo del Toro touches has that to it. I thought Jacob Elordi was like a total sensation in this movie. So it had a bit more than I thought of with F1 for me, but not enough to bump it up any higher. So number 9, Frankenstein. Number 8, I've got Train Dreams. I actually just watched this again last night because prior to the rewatch, I probably would have put it at number 10 because the first time I watched it was back in like, I think December, really late on a Friday night. I was definitely half asleep and falling asleep during it and woke up towards the end and was like, what's happening? He's in a plane. Why is he in a plane? Sorry, I need some water. I'm going to cut that because I know I hate ASMR noises in podcasts, so I'm not going to subject you to them. Train Dreams. Definitely liked it a lot better the second time around, paying attention and being awake the entire time. But still, again, I just said it with Frankenstein. I'm not a fan of a narrated movie, and Train Dreams is a narrated movie. And so I could really appreciate, Greg Quadar did such a great job with adapting the Sing Sing screenplay and directing that movie. And I think he did a great job with adapting this screenplay as well. I found it touching at times, but I also found it like a little too, dare I say, full of itself in terms of like wanting to show the visuals. And I think that works to an extent, but I can't forgive it for the entirety of what the movie is relying on to convey its message. So I found Joel Edgerton to be very good in it. Again, the visuals were stunning. The cinematography is absolutely gorgeous. And I thought the ending was cute. Not groundbreaking, but cute. So at number 8, I have Train Dreams. Number 7, I've got Begonia. I think this is one of my biggest letdowns of 2025. Maybe going in with false expectations for a Yorgos Lanthimos film, but I was definitely expecting more. I did have a friend, hi Owen, if you're watching this, who we took along to see this on our cinema club day, and prior to, he was like, I bet she's actually an alien, and that's the whole point of the story. And maybe it was because of that like correct spoiler that I didn't end up liking the movie as much. But I don't know. I was kind of left wanting more for this one, but I can, admire the story it was telling, the adaptation from the film it came from. I thought Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons and like the rest of that cast were really, really good in it. And at the end of the day, it made me think a bit. It left me shocked at times. So I think it's a deserving Best Picture nominee, but it is definitely a perfect number 7 for me. At number 6, I have The Secret Agent, the international submission from Brazil this year. I went to go see this. I honestly might need a refresher because it was back in like November, I believe, that I went and saw this in theater. So it's been a while. And I just remember The Secret Agent being very long. It is almost 3 hours. I don't know if it needed to be that long. However, I found at least probably the first 2/3 of the movie to be very engaging, very invigorating, very interesting, very energetic, with a very fascinating storyline. And I think it was like the back end that lost me a little bit. I also was like a little frustrated with like the whole flash forward to a future time thing with like somebody kind of getting a story for something, like, because it felt just very aligned with I'm Still Here in that way. And so I was like, oh, come on, like, are we really doing like the same ending that I'm Still Here had as another submission from Brazil? I don't know. So I was a little bummed out by that, as it being the end piece of this film, but overall I found it pretty good. So I think this one, lands great at number 6 for me. At number 5, I have Hamnet. So I know in my director pick, I had Chloe Zhao. However, as an overall movie-going experience, there are others on this list that I found to be more worthy of a Best Picture win. I think Hamnet was a singular experience. I think that's like the most crying I've ever heard in a movie theater and might be the most I ever hear, quite frankly. And I did really enjoy this film. I think I gave it 5 stars on Letterboxd. That might have been jumping the gun a little bit, if I'm being completely honest. Might need to give it a rewatch, and also just I think I was so like swept up in the emotion of it. I think we saw it the day after Christmas, so maybe we were on a Christmas high too. But yeah, so I don't think I would give it 5 stars again, because I don't know if I gave any other movie on this list 5 stars. However, I did find Hamnet to be a great staple of dramatic work for this year's Best Picture nominees. Like I said, like I think Chloe Zhao had like one of the most special directorial moments this year with Hamnet. Obviously Jessie Buckley getting to showcase herself as the acting revelation that she is in this film, along with, Paul Mescal and Jacoby Jupe. I think this worked really well on all cylinders. However, there are just other films this year that fired even harder on even more cylinders for me. So right at number 5, I've got Hamnet. As we get to the top 4 here, I just want to say that like 4, 3, 2, 1, they're really close. Like for me, these are just marginal points away from each other, and I'm putting them in order because if I were an Oscar voter, I would have to in order to submit a ballot. So at number 4, I have Sinners. It is kind of crazy. Like we're coming up soon on a year since Sinners came out, which is just absolutely wild. I think we need to go back to the Oscars being in early February, quite frankly. I remember, going to the theater the first time I saw Sinners and was like, I need everybody I know to see this, and I forced people to go to the theater with me to see it again. I hosted a viewing party at home, and it was actually that viewing party at home, that was my 3rd time seeing it at that point. And I started to like see the cracks a little bit, and it hit just a little bit less that 3rd time. And I think also, especially like being in a home environment as opposed to an in-theater environment as well. So, when I think about Best Picture and who I want to win, I probably should have started this section out with this. I'm thinking about, obviously the representation of like what the quote unquote best film of the year was. What's going to speak to the culture of right now really well? What is like just a good representation of filmmaking in this era? And then, what's the longevity? How are we going to look back at this in the next 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 50, 100 years and say, wow, that 2025 Best Picture winner makes sense, doesn't make sense, bad pick, good pick. All those things are kind of going in my mind as I think about this. And so for me with Sinners, watching it at home, I was like, another thing I think about with an Oscar winner is for Best Picture, it should hit anywhere close to the same. Now, I know in some ways, like an at-home viewing experience is never going to hit the same as an in-theater experience. And that's coming from me as someone who is pro go to the theater. Like, stop watching everything at home, get your ass in a cinema, go experience these things with other people in a format that it was intended to be viewed in. But I do think there is something to be said about films that can translate to any screen and still have close to the same impact. And I think for me, Sinners lacked that just a little bit. But, like I said, within this list of these top 4, they're so close for me. Like, I loved Sinners so much. That score was so incredible. That Warner shot is like one of my favorite scenes of the year. But overall, in comparison, I have it here at number 4. So number 4, I've got Sinners. At number 3, I have Marty Supreme. This is one again, pretty much like 4, 3, 2, and 1. Like all these, I'm going to theaters multiple times. telling all my friends, I'm dragging people to go see it, I'm telling people to go see it. Like, I want to share this thing with people. And I think that's like a big thing about how I vote for Best Picture as well, is like, how much do I want to share this with the world versus how much am I like, you know what? I can keep that one just for me. I don't need to waste other people's time with this. But these top four, you know, those are all ones that I'm like, no, I don't care what you're doing. I need you to see this movie. And Marty Supreme was one of those. You know, we went and saw it, and then the second time I got like a whole bigger group together to go see it, and it hit the same both times. I found it to be so exhilarating, so exciting, you know, such a great follow-up piece for Josh Safdie. Great performances all throughout, great discoveries with like Odessa Zion and Tyler the Creator. You know, I talked about with casting that this would be my vote. And I think it really is like a good representation of film this year. And so for me, I would have Marty Supreme at number 3. At number 2, I have One Battle After Another. Similar to Sinners, similar to Marty Supreme, went to see it in theaters multiple times, took people to go see it, have pushed people to see it, watched it at home. I made my brother watch this one with me on Christmas Eve, and this one hit really well at home too. I think the story like drove itself really well, and it's a testament to how Paul Thomas Anderson wrote the screenplay and directed the movie and everything. And like, so for me, like it was close to as enjoyable of an at home viewing experience as it was in the theater. You know, I remember the first time we saw it, I looked at my husband and was like, I literally looked at him halfway through and I was like, this movie fucking rules. And I don't think I've ever had that type of reaction before. And so I knew this film was something special. I knew it was going to be, if not my top, like one of my top 2 or 3 of the entire year. And it's been just like a really exciting year seeing how successful it's been. But One Battle After Another was just something that awoke something in me in terms of my love of film. You know, my admiration for these filmmakers and these performers within the movie. Like it just really did it for me in every single possible way. So at a very tight number 2, I have One Battle After Another. And so if you've been following along my ballot videos, you might not be surprised at what my number 1 is, and that is sentimental value. I have thought about this for several days now, toying between like, am I going to put One Battle or Sentimental Value at number 1? Going back and forth a lot. Like, you know, One Battle left me on such a high every time I saw it, especially that first time. I was like, you know, left the theater like, that is a fucking Best Picture winner. Let's get it going now. But sometimes, and kind of contradictory to like everything I said about what I look for in a Best Picture winner, like sometimes your heart takes over. And I think Sentimental Value is the movie that took my heart this year. And did something kind of weird with it. Like it didn't break it and put it back together. It kind of like caressed it and then pushed it out on its own. That's kind of a metaphor I'm coming up with right now. Sentimental Value, as I've said several times, you know, this one was just really, really special to me. I'm a sucker for this kind of indie drama like style of film, and like am a big supporter of those types of films being recognized, because I'm worried that like those are at risk if we don't. And so that's another thing, you know, like with Anora last year, I was a huge fan of Anora, and like correctly predicted all 5 of its Oscar wins, by the way, but also, you know, was such a support, aside from my love for that film, like was such a supporter of the idea of Sean Baker and independent film being recognized on this global platform, in order, because I think in order to continue getting those types of films, we have to give it this type of platform. And so I think that's part of the reason why my heart is with Sentimental Value so much too, is because like I need to see this type of film, this type of cinema keep getting created. Whereas, you know, I don't know if movies like One Battle After Another or Marty Supreme are necessarily as much as at risk when they have, you know, mega filmmakers with like either mega stars in them or like some reason why like people are going to buy tickets to go see them. That I think they have some risk with them, but like not as much as a foreign language independent film from like a not very well known director with a very unknown cast, aside from like an older legend and a younger childhood actress turned like Hollywood megastar kind of supporting in it. But you know what I mean? Like those reasons, like with Sentimental Value, along with wanting to share it with like this, it's funny. I think about, you know, with like Sinners, Marty Supreme, and One Battle After Another, I was very much like so energetic about getting my friends to go see it with me because like I wanted to see their reactions. But like with my friends that I took to see Sentimental Value, that one felt like I was like sharing something truly. I'm kind of having this revelation right now, honestly, where, you know, I knew there were like such exciting things about Sinners and Marty Supreme in one battle after another that like a lot of people could get on board with or would at least find like interesting enough to sit through the entire thing. But with Sentimental Value, like I knew it was kind of risky. Like, you know, it's quieter, it's longer. I mean, all these movies are long, but like it's dialogue heavy. It's not the most like energetic and engaging subject matter. And so, you know, my friends that I took to see it, it felt like a special like sharing moment of like, hey, like I'm kind of letting you into something that I found really impactful this year and I think you will as well and I'm trusting you with that. So yeah, you know, all of those reasons I gave on top of everything else I've talked about with how much I love Sentimental Value have led me to decide that that would be my number one best picture rank for this year's Academy Awards. That does it for my personal rankings of the 98th Annual Academy Awards. Thank you all so much for tuning in. Stay tuned. I have a very busy Wednesday evening coming up in 2 days where I will be recording my final predictions video, going through all 24 categories, giving my detailed breakdown of who I think is going to win each category and why. So I hope you look forward to that, and we will see you all next time. Thanks so much. Bye.